Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. To give you some context, let me share how I ended up in this mess. After finishing high school in 2003, it was tough to find a job. So I took whatever terrible jobs I could find just to make ends meet. Eventually I landed a full-time position cleaning fire and water damage. I was thrilled to have a stable income and start saving. What began as a promising shift in my life soon turned into a 2-year nightmare. My first assignment was cleaning a basement flooded with sewage, which we completed in a few days. One morning my boss called me into his office and told me about a special team he was forming. He asked if I'd be the team leader, overseeing 3 newly hired guys. I was surprised, since I only worked there for about 3 days. I thought my hard work was paying off and that I'd get a raise. I was only earning $10 an hour. Instead, I got no raise and no training for the new role. I received a work van with cleaning supplies and contact info for the 3 new hires. My boss told me which tools and cleaning products to use and where to find them in the van, including hazmat suits and respirators. However, he didn't give me many details about the tasks I'd be doing. He said every job would be different and I'd receive specific instructions for each one. He assured me that I wouldn't have to deal with any deceased persons, as the coroner would remove them before my team arrived. My first job in the new role involved cleaning up after an elderly person who had passed in their home, sitting in a chair. When we arrived, the coroner identified to me the hazardous materials that required removal due to the disease risk they posed. To my dismay, the body was still there, visibly decomposing, and the stench was unbearable, even through our masks. 2 of my teammates got sick from the smell and had to step outside. After the coroner's team removed the body, we began our work. Strange things started happening almost immediately. While I was disassembling the chair, it started rocking on its own, and I was about 10 feet away. I brushed it off and continued working, though soon after I began to feel a chill up and down my spine and started feeling ill. Next I had to deal with the carpet and floor. My boss advised me to pour a special cleaning solution onto the area to soak into the floorboards. When I returned to the house with the cleaner, all 3 guys from the basement were scrambling to get out, visibly terrified. They said they had seen someone in the cluttered basement and had suspected it was a homeless person or a drug addict, both common issues in Detroit. I listened next to one of the open windows to the basement. We usually opened all the windows and doors when we started working, so maybe someone had gotten in then, or maybe even before we'd arrived. After listening for a while and hearing nothing, another worker and I went in with a flashlight and, for protection, a metal fence post to search the basement. We didn't find anyone, but as we went up the stairs, we heard a terrible hacking cough coming from behind us. However, after checking once more, we found nothing. Yet in a corner of the basement, we saw that dust had visibly been stirred up, as if someone had recently moved things around, which freaked both of us out. We called the others back in, and they resumed sorting through boxes. However, they kept having the sensation of being touched while handling the contaminated items. When I returned to my task upstairs, I noticed the cleaning solution I left by the floorboards was gone. I began moving some more of the hazmat bags to the front of the house, thinking I'd find it eventually. I discovered it on its side, next to another of these bags, which had parts from the dismantled chair. This seemed impossible, as I'd been using it on the floorboards upstairs, and certainly hadn't moved it. Additionally, there were 6 other bags piled up around the one containing the chair parts. How could the cleaner have ended up between them all? I'd been using it during the time that all those bags had been piling up. All the other guys had either been upstairs with me or in the basement, so none of them could have moved it there either. And it would have required a significant amount of effort to move, especially considering it was a gallon-sized bottle and in amongst multiple bags of hazmat waste. I thought it was all very strange. At that moment, another chill ran up my spine in response to what sounded like a whisper, though I couldn't make out what was said. I just shrugged them off as forgetfulness and imagination and finished cleaning the floorboards and removing the trash, and the job was done. That night, both me and a couple of the other workers had a dream about an old man telling us we weren't welcome in his home and needed to leave. In my dream, I was alone in his house. The old man cried, saying I was destroying his things and that he couldn't replace them. He kept trying to push me out of the house, but I appeared to be ignoring him. He eventually threw my cleaning solution into the garbage pile by the front door, exactly where I'd found it. 2 of the 3 crew members also told me about dreams that they'd had about an old man pushing them as they sorted through the boxes of contaminated items. They described the experience like they were on autopilot and had no control over their actions, even though mentally they were aware and upset with what they were doing. They mentioned the man becoming upset and violently coughing, grabbing their arms when they touched boxes or disposed of any items. Neither of them had been in the house when the other worker and I had heard the coughing from the basement. The guy who went into the basement with me, although also recalling a dream, only remembered waking up sad and having a terrible coughing fit. It might have been a coincidence, but I connected it to the other dreams. We all talked about it and concluded that it was just our minds reacting to the disturbing nature of the situation, that it was all our way of coping with what we had to do. It was, after all, our first experience being tasked to do something so morbid. The next few jobs weren't so bad, including cleaning up blood from a home invasion and other crime scenes. About 2 weeks into the job, we got the hang of things and were split into 2 groups. I felt decently competent managing both as the crew leader. I thought we were getting used to the job, but I was wrong. The next job with strange activity was the scene of someone who had taken their own life. A middle-aged man had used a firearm, and it was a mess. The coroner had already removed the body, but there were a lot of unsettling fluids and other materials remaining. The smell was terrible since the body hadn't been found right away. Our first step was to vacuum up all the biological material. The coroner told us that he and his partner had felt uneasy in the house and that it had always felt strange. We also had a suffocating claustrophobic sensation when we entered the basement. To make things worse, the man's family was crying upstairs, although the vacuum noise helped to block that out. Nevertheless, it was a truly heartbreaking situation. While I was cleaning, the lights suddenly went out and it was completely dark. Strangely, my vacuum still had power. My co-worker started screaming, so I turned off my vacuum and got off my ladder. I thought maybe he'd touched a wire, but even with my vacuum off, he kept screaming, and I heard things being knocked over. I fumbled around for the flashlight on my tool belt, yelling for my friend to find out what was happening. All I heard was panicked screaming. Then in the pitch black, I saw a dark figure moving toward me, and I admit I panicked. I slipped while trying to back up and finally found my flashlight as my back hit the basement wall. When I turned it on, I saw the shape of a man in a flannel shirt with a beard and an angry expression. Then suddenly, he was gone. My co-worker was sitting on the floor behind where the entity was, rocking with his hands on his head. When I approached, he picked up his flashlight and turned it on, then ran upstairs and outside to throw up. I followed him, asking him if he was okay, and why was he screaming. I thought I'd imagined the entity and the man, but he told me he was scrubbing the wall when he felt something pulling on an object in his tool belt. He thought it was me, but when he turned around, the lights went out, and he was surrounded by what seemed like dark smoke. He couldn't breathe and struggled to move. He managed to pull out his flashlight, but it was knocked out of his hand. In this almost incapacitated state, he forced himself to let out a scream, and as he did so, trinkets started falling off a nearby entertainment system, and the dark smoke moved back. He said that in the ordeal he'd lost his hearing, and didn't know it even made any noise. The things falling off the shelves had landed on him, which is why he'd covered his head. Then suddenly he felt a weight lift off of him and the dark smoke backed up. But he immediately felt sick, and strangely the light from my flashlight had made the feeling worse. We had an early lunch and he just sat there, pale and quiet. I got him some Gatorade and his colour started to return. I never told him that I'd seen a man when I turned on my light, since we still had to finish the job, and no doubt such a thing would have quite easily made him leave on the spot. When we went back, the basement lights were on again. Half the things that had fallen from the shelves were back on the entertainment system, and the TV was displaying a baseball game. The room also smelled like burnt hair. My co-worker stayed for half an hour, got sick again and went home, leaving me to finish alone. While cleaning up, I kept seeing the shape of a person in my peripheral vision, always accompanied by the burnt hair smell. A few times I also felt something pulling an item on my belt. When I finished the job, I went to use the bathroom upstairs and heard muffled crying or moaning in the hallway. I thought a family member might have returned, but I saw a picture on the wall of a bearded man in a flannel shirt, reminiscent of the one I'd seen moving towards me, though I'd never made out his face. There were other pictures of the same man with deer, fish and family members. I hadn't seen a picture of him before, since I hadn't been anywhere else in the house before this time. After I secured the house, closing windows, locking doors and turning off lights, I saw the front curtain move and again saw the dark figure I'd seen earlier in the front window. The last experience I'll share happened in mid-July in a rough area of Detroit. A man had supposedly tried to abduct a child but was stopped by locals who'd beaten him badly. He escaped to his house where the neighbours called the police and had surrounded his house to prevent him from escaping before they arrived. The police response time in this neighbourhood was awful and people started throwing rocks through the man's window and vandalising his car. The man was badly injured by the mob and had passed away in his home, possibly from being hit by a rock or glass, perhaps even by his former injuries. According to a police officer, it was all a misunderstanding. The man picked up an injured girl riding a bike, but some kids who knew her told their parents that he was kidnapping her, leading to an overreaction and the man being brutally beaten. Cleaning up the house was relatively simple. We secured the windows and cleaned up blood and other fluids. But as soon as I entered, I felt overwhelming fear and sadness in waves, making my legs weak. My co-worker, who arrived late and who hadn't even heard the cop's story, felt the same way. Throughout our time there, we saw a fog-like figure darting around corners as if watching us, and then hiding. We also heard faint cries for help and pleas to stop. A few times the crowd came back and yelled at the house, and during these moments the activity inside increased. We heard running footsteps and doors slamming, but never saw them move. The footsteps seemed to go from the front door through the living room to the bathroom and up the stairs to the upstairs room. What really got to me was feeling the vibrations of the footsteps as they ran past me while I was cleaning. When we left the house, people were still hostile and yelled at us as we loaded the van and removed our hazmat suits. We ignored them, but before we could finish, the front door slammed so hard it sounded like a gunshot. This startled me and my crewmate, as well as some other onlookers on a nearby front porch, so much so that they took off back inside. The front door deadbolt had also become locked, and we couldn't open it, so we were forced to leave some of the leftover boards inside the house that we'd been using to board up some of the windows. As soon as I stepped outside, it was like a switch flipped and I immediately felt better. My co-worker and I joked and laughed about regular teenage stuff. I'd written down many of these stories in a journal I'd started after my first few months on the job. I'd also heard many strange stories from the other crew members. Some of these experiences might be my mind's way of coping with trauma, but others have no explanation, especially when I hear similar stories from crew members who haven't been influenced by mine. Things got worse after I started the journal, with several paranormal encounters and situations that pushed me to my mental limit. In the end, I worked at this job for almost 2 years, and all of my fellow crew members ended up passing away. 2 ended their own lives, and 1 possibly did so through a drug-related incident. When we started this job, we were all normal 19 to 20-year-olds focused on girls, parties and work. I watched each of them lose their joy and passion for life. And as terrible as it sounds, each one made sure to pass in a clean way, probably so that others wouldn't have to witness the horrors we saw so often.